I guess the first thing I want to ask, Babak, is do we have any updates? This seems like a movie that, since you've made it, probably things have happened, things have not happened. What is the latest?
Thank you very much. Thank you for also. I turn this on, or can they hear me?
Are these
Can I be heard?
are they on?
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for coming. It's a difficult film to watch. It was difficult to go through it, and I really appreciate your coming and joining us on this journey. Um, Updates, unfortunately, not much in terms of what the families and Hamed really want, which is to bring the Iranian regime to justice in an impartial, independent, international court where the truth can be discovered. And that, unfortunately, has not come about yet. There are promises made. There are all kinds of various scenarios being played out since January 5th, 2022. Uh, Essentially, the official negotiation phase of the process ended, and the five countries, led by Canada, uh, essentially said the negotiations aren't going to go anywhere, and we're going to have to refer this to the international courts. I will leave when Hamid joins us later on for him to elaborate a little bit further on that. But we're waiting for this to be brought to court. When that's going to happen is still a mystery to all of us.
Um, well, then can we talk about how you came to make this movie, and how you convinced Hamid to participate and be a part of this?
Well, we never said about making a documentary. This film was a byproduct of my relationship with Hamid and the victims' families. I was called upon within a matter of hours after the plane was shot down to help. Uh, we knew I was part of an organization. I was the artistic director of a arts and culture organization. Do I switch this? Of an arts and culture organization that lost a few volunteers on the flight, and the organization immediately set about to uh, hold a memorial, a vigil, which turned into a huge project. About 4 or 5 thousand people showed up within a matter of days. I think on the 12th of January, 3 days later, and at that event, I was asked by a mutual friend if I know Hamed Esmaeilion, and I didn't, unfortunately. And he said that he's on his way back to Iran, and can I help? That was the beginning of my relationship. And I just volunteered to help in any way I could, to liaise with government officials, to follow what Hamed is going through. And by the third day, when it was discovered for a fact that the plane was shot down, we heard that Hamed is adamant on bringing the remains of his wife and daughter back to Canada. So there were a lot of logistical issues. Hamed returned, and he asked if I could help direct the memorial ceremony for his wife and daughter. He was also holding a private burial ceremony for Parisa and Rira, and he was kind enough to invite me to that. And our relationship began to take shape. And after the memorial, we met. He's a writer, I'm a filmmaker, so it's inevitable that something is going to come about. And he was resistant. I mean, you can imagine, or one can't imagine, the sense of grief and vulnerability that someone would have. And we started by mostly him telling me stories and remembering the times with his family. And I kept saying, this has to be documented. This has to be memorialized in real time. And I think soon afterwards, we thought, in addition to the work that we're doing together in trying to help the families, trying to figure out ways to how are we going to get justice? You know, these are ordinary people, as I say in the film, thrust into extraordinary circumstances. I just felt, and meanwhile there was COVID, the restrictions. Meanwhile, I couldn't even have a crew, and I'm happy that I didn't. it was a very intimate relationship where I would just grab onto anything and try to capture those moments. And it ended up with about 350 hours of footage that had to be cataloged and sifted together until.
You always hear from documentary filmmakers that there's this point where the trust and just there's the convincing be a part of this movie, and then it turns into collaboration sometimes with your subject. You kind of maybe sometimes need that. Was that the case here?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, on various levels. First of all, it was amazing how we came to know each other in the most extraordinary circumstances, and we found so much in common in terms of our worldview and our sensibilities to issues. And also, eventually, I mean, for me, it was how can I help? How can I help the families? How can I help alleviate the pain that they're going through? And Herzog has a cardinal rule that he says a documentary filmmaker should never get involved, emotionally attached to a subject. And for me, yes, I had to be the fly on the wall, but I found myself to be the fly on the wall of a smoldering oven of pain and emotion, and it was too hot, and I fell in and became a stakeholder. And ultimately, I felt within the structure of the film and the narrative, I have to tell my audience that what happened, how I went from a wide angle, long shot, sitting in a car and asking what happened to somebody who becomes a stakeholder. And I'm deeply touched and grateful for the trust and the confidence that Hamed had in me, and eventually he became like a brother I never had. And I think this would be a good opportunity for me to invite that brother I never had to join us here on stage and the conversation, if you don't mind. Hamed Jan, come in.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome, Hamed. Watching this movie, it sort of feels like it seems to be saying that grief doesn't ensure justice, and justice doesn't necessarily stop grief. Like they're two very different things. And did it feel like that, both experiencing it and making the movie about it?
Should we start with Hamed?
I think we should start with Hamed.
Take the better mic.
Honestly, I myself, I never had time for grieving. I never had time for mourning. As you see, what you see here in this documentary is just the peak of the iceberg. From the meetings, from informants, from meeting with families, because we formed the association, and now we have like the families of 142 victims in our association out of 176. But at the same time, finding the answers for what really happened was our fight. And you can imagine that we went everywhere. We went to International Civil Aviation Organization, to YASA, to YATA, to TSB, to Ukrainian government, British government, Canadian government, Swedish government, and to the international courts, actually, like 14th of September, finally, us as families of the victims in our association, we submitted the case in International Criminal Court because none of these governments acted on behalf of us. I know that the process is going forward, but not in the way that we want. Finding the answers and seeing justice happens was the main goal. But as I said, majority of the family members, they had no time for mourning. And I can't say that which one should happen first. You know that in classic terms we say that the mourning has 5 stages, but in this case it doesn't apply in this case, I can tell you.
What has running an association? How has that helped you process all of this?
I can tell you that the members of the association are my family right now. I mean, at the same time that we were crying and we were dealing with COVID-19, we started to have online meetings. At the time that nobody had a chance to go to the streets and protest, like these days that you see in the streets of the world, and we were locked down in our houses. And I think we used that time to form the association. And I think in the history of like after revolution, at least after revolution, we never had an association for the families, and that was a unique situation. So and we tried to make it from scratch with all international standards, like have a fact-finding committee, have a translation committee, external relation committee, legal committee, social media committee, and I think we have probably up to 9 committees that all of them is run by a family member. So to form all of these, to document all of these, it needed a big effort to do it, and now you see that this association is very involved with the revolution that is happening in Iran, and now this has become like one of the stakeholders of planning for protests in the globally.
I mean, for both of you, does the movie feel like a different film now since the war in Ukraine and the protests in the last couple of months?
Every time I watch it is a different movie for me, because every time you watch it, there's something new on the news. And now I'm watching this and I'm like, I remember those days of the meetings and the way desperately I was asking everyone to help us. And you see it on the scene here that I said to them that you say that you have your options on the table. I have my own options on the table too. And I said I prefer to go to Tehran and stand with other family members in the cold streets of Tehran. There was another sentence of after this, I think, that I just mentioned that to the advisor of the prime minister, that I said, I'm going to go to Tehran. And if prime minister is not serious about taking this case to the International Court of Justice, you don't need to go to the media. Just tell me and other family members that you're not serious. Then we know what to do. We have credibility among Iranian people and others, and we don't want to spend it on some people that they don't act on behalf of us. So, and this case goes that way, I think.
Babak, you want to talk to the...
Yeah, very much. What is remarkable? What is remarkable? We have to fix that.
So you're a team.
For me, yeah, very much. Look, I could not fathom the depth of grief and devastation that these families would have experienced. But as an observer, especially very close to Hamed, between when Hamed returned from Iran, when we started working together, until more or less April of 2022, it might have been 3 or 4 days that we were apart. We would spend 10, 15 hours a day together. And immediately, by March 15th, by the middle of March, these families who come from the most random, diverse, there's nothing in common between these families except that they were on that flight. But by March, which is less than 2 months, they had formed an association, they formed an agenda, and I observed how Hamed, as an inspiring force very much, would convert grief, sorrow, and that deep sense of frustration, rage, and possibly sense of revenge, desiring revenge, convert all of that into a resolve to find justice, to action, to bring themselves together. And from the very outset, I mean, currently under these current circumstances, many people say, well, how the Families Association and Hamed have transformed into a voice of victims in Iran. For me, there's no transformation. From the very beginning, they kept shouting out that we are another link in the chain of crimes over the last 44 years under this fascist apartheid regime. And what happened to us could happen to you, could happen to the rest of the world, could happen to other people in the Middle East. And it blew up in the world's face in the case of Ukraine with Russia. And it can blow up in the world's face in the Middle East if we don't do something about it. And I heard the families insisting on that and trying to impress the government of Canada, the media. And hopefully, and I think they were uniquely successful in at least putting a dent in that situation. And my hope in my contribution to their fight for justice was to make this film as a means to reach beyond the Iranian community who understands pretty much what is happening in Iran, to affect the media, governments, very many of them among Western governments, they have been either actively appeasing the Iranian regime over the last several decades, or they've been too naive to understand the monster that they're dealing with. And the families have been trying over the last 3 years. And the recent 5-6 weeks have been in a way a vindication of the families' plea and cry for freedom, for justice, for human rights.
I think with that, I'm going to throw it out to questions if anybody has, and I will repeat the question after you ask it. So,
Yes. The middleman was asking for $75,000, apparently for some important documents that he had at his disposal. Did you finally decide to buy the documents? And if you did, have you used any of it in this documentary? And is there anything that you're not sharing with us that we hope for to share with people at an international court?
okay, so the question was about the middleman and the $75,000, whether you had considered getting the documents, and if you have any other new information regarding that that might be helpful to people.
First of all, there were many such calls. Imagine my grief. Many of us here in the industry, imagine that what I had to go through to get 90, 100 minutes out of the story that I was trying to tell. So I couldn't tell all of them, and the variation among these informants that were calling. And you can imagine also how the families, including Hamed, the microphone, I will scream and I will shout. Now this one is working. Any of our musician friends can help with this technical problem. So I imagine how I would observe how the families wishful thinking. They would grab onto any of these calls thinking that there might be something there. What if there is something there? And obviously, we had to be pessimistic and skeptical about all of that. I don't think, other than one case that we had a feeling about, the rest of them were either anti-information. There were 2 cases. So I'll let Hamed elaborate a little bit more on the question, but I think most of it was psychological warfare. And it was devastating to see how the officials, either the Royal Mounted Canadian Police or any other organization, would not come to their rescue. It was saying, I don't know how to navigate through this. I don't know how to see if it's false. Some of it was obvious. Hamed is going to explain, like the date on it. You can tell that this is false documents. But the rest of it needed expert attention. And other than 2, I don't think of the many there was anything else that we can hold on to, Hamed.
Yeah, I remember. Working? This is working. So I remember that case, for example. He was in IRGC, that was for sure. He sent me the letter. Everything was perfect. I mean, the literature, the context, everything. But the date was wrong. So it was supposed to be in January, but it was in November. And I said to him that I can't use it, sorry. And he said, he started to insult me, actually. So I think I can't count for you how many people contacted us. This one was for money. Some people for coming to Canada, and the other informant that you heard his voice. He was a very nice man. I think he just wanted to help, but his witness was in another country, and it was COVID time, and I had to travel to that country. I checked on Canadian embassy. I learned that he had contacted Canadian embassy. So I said to the RCMP, like federal police in Canada, why you don't go and contact this person? They said he's not in Canadian soil, and we can't help. They didn't open the criminal case. So it was very disappointing for us that Canada didn't open a criminal case. Ukraine was the only country. And that's why we think that this case needs a criminal investigation. The only two places that we can find a criminal investigation one is in Ukraine, that now is already stopped because of the war. The other one is in Iran. So there are 10 patsies accused for being involved in this crime, and nobody knows them. And for your information, last week they wanted to start a trial again. Last year they did that, and families they succeeded to stop the procedure or process in Iran. But last week they wanted to do it again, and then when they heard that we are going to react, they postponed that again.
I know that I have the honor of moderating the Q&A tomorrow, but I don't know how much time we'll have then, so I'd love to ask a question. It feels like that you, from watching this documentary, the feeling that I get on Babak as well, that you have a feeling about why that plane was shot down. And I'm curious if you'd be comfortable with expressing your feeling.
Asking a theory, if you have a theory about why the plane was shot down, and would you tell them?
Well, I'll start from a filmmaking standpoint. It was very easy to fall into the trap of whodunit, conspiracy theories, and presenting all kinds of scenarios. The typical Iranian sort of expert on every level. It was too easy to fall into that trap. And possibly also to appease and appeal to the family's sensibilities. But the essence of the story, other than the human element that I focused on, and I just wanted to portray Hamed's journey, somebody who's orphaned, becomes a wanderer, has to become a warrior, and ultimately is on the trajectory to becoming a hero. The other element of it was to insist on the fact that justice is meaningless without the truth, and until we know the truth, we will never have justice. So I refrained from entering into that. You can imagine, and some people who know me personally, I want to buy a garbage can for the kitchen, I researched for 3 months. Imagine how I can picture myself sitting inside this missile launcher and knowing how to operate it. I have theories about it, but it's baseless without having a proper investigation, and I don't want to fall into that trap of presenting ideas.
But I can.
Well, no, you can't. We both have philosophized over it a lot, and the film is trying to stimulate the audience to saying, what do you think under these circumstances? How can so many errors be lined up so perfectly, a series of errors be so fine-tuned for only one outcome? Out of 8 airplanes, all of them either from friendly countries or NATO countries, one of them happens to be Ukrainian and happens to be the target of this so-called human error. I'll let you satisfy the rest of the question.
Yes, I have a theory. There are several theories, and the one that I feel it's right, Hossein Salami is explaining that we were involved in a war, and we wanted to stop that war in a way. He has a concept in IRGC. They call it asymmetrical war. It's a concept in every army, but in IRGC, It's like doing something somewhere else when you're involved in a real war. You witnessed that in the last 6 weeks. I think when they put fire in even prison, when that attack happened in Shiraz, this is the way to distract people. And at that time, when they were involved in the war, they wanted to do something to reduce the tensions. At that night, everybody was talking about World War III, but then stopped. 6 countries had flights that night. Russia, obviously not a target. Germany and Australia, NATO members, and European Union members. It was Turkey, NATO member since 1952, and the last one is Qatar Airlines, the only friend that they have in Persian Gulf. No American was on the flight. The other flights, they had Americans on. The third one is this plane was a Boeing. There were only 2 Boeings that night, Qatar Airlines and Ukrainian Airlines. So for these 3 reasons, I think they were smart enough to choose a target. And other thing, why this happened right at the airport? Nobody, people ask why this didn't happen in Tabriz, in Zanjan, in other places. You all know probably that the airplane crashes usually happen in the first 5 to 10 minutes or the last 5 to 10 minutes. 90% of the cases, based on the university's researches that I've read. So, and we had access to the file in Tehran's court. And there is a report somewhere that they are sure that they tried to tamper with the plane. And when you go to the black boxes, there's 16 minutes missing. So the time of the first missile doesn't really match with the time that the explosion happened in the airplane. So my theory is that they had tried to down the plane with a technical failure. And all of you remember those 3 days, that they were ready. That was a technical failure. And then they had to shoot it down at the end because the first scenario didn't work. That's my scenario.
We have time for one more.
I think somewhere toward the end of the movies you said ordinary people wouldn't get justice, right? So I really want to see how do you define justice in a case that on one side there are just like regular day-to-day families, and the other side is a monstrous terrorist government who's not responsible. I mean, who doesn't believe is responsible for anything, not even responding to people. So how do you define justice in this case?
The question is about defining justice in a case like this.
Like, who's in? Who would be the person in charge? Is it the person who actually pushed the button? Is it like was it Kharazi, or is it like Khamenei himself? Like,
I think everybody who was involved in this crime should come to the court. I mean, from the operator to the supreme leader of Iran. As I say in my documentary, we wanted arrest warrants. That's what we want. We want to see them in the court. So the path that these 4 countries are taking will end to the International Court of Justice, but nobody will appear in the court in the witnesses stand. That's why now I have a bigger hope that we can have a trial in free Iran. That's what I'm fighting for.
Well, that's a wonderfully hopeful way to end this. And I want to say, Babak, thank you for making this movie, Hamed for participating in it. And it doesn't seem like the last movie to be made about this topic. So with that, thank you IDA for having the screening, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.